Maximize your accounting career by becoming high yield and low maintenance with the Upstream Leader podcast. Your passport to improved knowledge, skills, and career potential. Stay tuned for insights, expertise, and thought-provoking discussion. And now, here's your host, Heath Alloway.
Welcome back to the Upstream Leader podcast. I'm Heath Alloway, your host for today's episode. And our guest today is Ben Decker, Chairman and Co-CEO of Decker Communications. Ben, it's great to see you again. Looking forward to having you on the show.
Excited to be here. Thanks, Heath.
So Ben, we'll jump right in. Something we ask every guest to get the conversation started is, what has really made you the leader that you are today?
That question can easily become a self-proclaiming, self pat on the back. So I'm a little worried about how to answer that. As one of our values of our company is humble confidence. And so it doesn't feel very humble to tell you why I think I'm the leader I am. But I'll turn it into how I think I'm the person I am, which ties into leadership, which ties into communication, of course. But growing up, my mom passed away when I was young, and I had a lot of independence. And the way I grew up was pretty close with my father, and we ended up going into business together after I had a different career. But that allowed me for discernment, judgment, trusting my own judgment, and also learning the power of communications, which ties into education, influencing others, bringing people along, getting them to want to do something versus have to do something. And luckily, that's the profession that I'm in. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. With care. When we hire people, I always ask, just care. All I ask is that you care more. And so that's luckily pretty innate in me, of caring for clients, thinking about them, what's coming up, what's going on, is it going well, what can we do? And so I think that ties into a leadership. I don't know if it's servant leadership, but there's more of a care there.
Yeah, and Ben, I think in most cases, people can see if you truly care or if it's a fake caring. So Ben, let me ask you this on your comment there. You said that you and your father were close and went into business together. I was reading your bio this morning, and there was a comment in there about how you were immersed into the Decker method pretty early on. And it was something along the lines of you were videotaped before your junior high book reports. I don't know if those were presentations or what that may be. How did that influence what you're doing today, or did it even influence what you're doing today?
Well, it did. So it becomes part of your DNA. But if you think about kids today, Snapchat, Instagram, them seeing themselves so much on video, I actually think it's a good thing. It hasn't happened like this in generations past. So in my generation, Generation X, you don't normally see yourself on video. I did grow up seeing myself on video, realizing what I'm doing, the experience I create. So it was helpful just to know what my face is doing, what my hands are doing. And I think kids are much more aware of what they're doing and comfortable seeing themselves. I mean, I have 3 teenage boys, and the Snapchat and the pictures taking of themselves, even if they're looking away, just quick sending these pictures, it is very helpful to be aware of what you're doing. And that's really what we do as a company. We help people become more aware. And so going back to that middle school of myself, yeah, that had a huge impact on me and how I see myself and how I want to come across.
Very good, Ben. Well, with that, you kind of got into this a little bit about what you do, but just to give our listeners a little bit of a foundation for the work that you do, and I think it's very important work that you're doing. Tell us a little bit about Decker, and what you're doing to help people from that communication standpoint.
Sure. It's from CEO to sales. We are a firm based out of San Francisco, but we're really nationwide. We have about 40 people that travel the country and the world, working with anywhere from Fortune 500, Fortune 10, to startups, entrepreneurs, in helping them communicate better. And so my airplane pitch is we help people in what they say and how they say it. And so when I describe that to people on a plane, oftentimes they'll say, shoot, I could use that. To which I say, we all can. And it's just one of these things that you can always get better in communications. And so we help people become aware of how they come across. We use a lot of video feedback, put people on video, and then get them in an environment where they can get private coaching, ideally, and be told the good, the bad, the ugly of what they're doing with ways of getting better, whether it be eye communication, voice, smile, hands, doesn't matter. But then what you say, the content, We introduce a way to put together thoughts, ideas, keynotes, all hands, just a message with the ideal that it's influential. People know why they're listening. People know what it is you want them to do. And that's a big challenge when, you and I work with a lot of financial advisors, accountants, CPA firms. You can get into informing and just sharing numbers and information. So much of our world at Decker is really trying to have people think differently about their content into where do you want them to go? And audiences want that. They want to know what they should do. And so then it's about putting it in a way that can get them to nod their head, that there's a touch of emotion in the message versus just pure data, facts, figures.
Well, Ben, I know people can't see us on video, but when you said getting people to nod their head, I saw myself just nodding my head as you were talking. So maybe after the episode, we'll wait and you can critique me afterwards. We won't do that during the show, but we'll wait till afterwards. So, Ben, with what you do and the audience you just described, when you talk about communication, how important is that in someone's leadership journey and the success of their own career?
Well, you can argue it's almost everything. There's a Bruce Barton quote that I quote oftentimes in the beginning of speeches or programs, and I'll paraphrase it, but basically it says, it doesn't matter how much you know from all that I've seen from doers, saints, writers combined. One thing is certain. Talkers have always ruled. They will continue to rule. Smart thing is to join them. Now, I've shared that quote with hundreds of people, and there are people that get offended with that quote, meaning people that are experts in their fields, MBA, PhD, people that are so smart. And it's not dismissing knowledge, but it's basically using that knowledge to open up doors. You'll have a low ceiling if you can't communicate well. You can have the best idea, the best invention, best innovation possible. But if you can't communicate it well, it's going to have a low ceiling. That's the point. So we have to communicate well to get people to buy in, to get people to want to get people to take that idea and run with it. Same thing with large corporations. A CEO says a message, and the problem is it doesn't go through the organization. People don't take it and communicate it well to the front line. And so that's a lot of work we do just to make sure our message permeates, goes through, is absorbed. People get it. People want to. So you could argue it is a huge part of success of how people come across. As I'm working with an investor day for a Fortune 500 company, that they're looking at shareholders and what matters to them. And right now, the management percentage is not as high as they want it to be. Meaning, as an investor, I don't have as much confidence in the management team because of basically how they communicate. So you connect that to any business, any industry, it ties in.
Well, Ben, with the importance that you just described there, why do you think so many organizations, so many leaders will still say communication is a soft skill?
Yeah, it's one of my least favorite terms. And I usually, whenever I hear it, I battle it and I call it out as an elephant in the room. Same thing with in what we do, people will say, oh, you do presentation skills. And it really limits how you think about what we're talking about. Am I presenting to you, Heath, right now? Or to your audience? No, you and I are talking. So when people say a soft skill, it makes it as an optional, in my opinion. You can't help but brand it as a nice to have, not a need to have. Soft skill. It's a mandatory skill. In fact, LinkedIn tied it as the number one needed skill for hiring this year. Communications is the top skill needed and wanted in hiring. So soft skill is a terrible branding issue that I would hope every one of your listeners don't think of it that way. And they think of it as a higher, more critical skill. But soft skill treats it like it'd be good to have, but not have to have.
Yeah, and Ben, I think the other side of that is not just from a professional standpoint, but every aspect of your life. Communication plays a key role in coaching your kids' sports team or how you communicate and connect with your friends. And so, Ben, I'm curious. Well, one, I'm actually glad you answered it that way because so many times I said this is a core leadership skill. It is a core people skill that we all should focus on and work at getting better at. I'm going to share some stats with you, and I'm curious to see how you respond to this. But I shared in some of our presentations when we're talking about being an advisor and truly listening to connect with people. And we see so many distractions. So some stats all throughout. say we spend over 3 hours on average on our cell phones a day. Maybe we get 50 to 75 to 100 emails a day. Maybe we spend, that 3.5 hours, we check our phone over 300 times a day. How is all the distractions or the things that we are constantly bombarded with, how does that impact our listening skills and effective communication?
Well, some people say there's no such thing as multitasking. So think of it that way of, can I do this and that? And the idea of being present and showing you're present. I mean, a lot of the coaching we do, we remind people and the communicators that it's not about you, it's about them, the audience, your listener. So how do you focus on them? We give an example in our programs where eye communication, let's just talk about eye communication, and you bring up cell phones. If we pair people up, A and B, and A talk to B about your morning, doesn't matter what you say. And so we have B look at A while they are listening. And then we yell and say, B, look away. A, keep talking. And so B is looking away. And it's very distracting. And bottom line, we switch it around and we just talk about, how does that feel? And it doesn't feel good. It feels rude. And then we ask, how often does that happen? So to your point around distractions, if I'm at a cocktail party with you, Heath, and I want to see Joe, Sue, or Bob, but I'm here with Heath and my eyes are going over there and looking over at them, even though you and I have a drink in hand and we're talking to each other, do you feel like I'm there with you? And the answer is no. And that's because of a distraction, whether it be a cell phone or a person and what I'm doing with my eyes. I need you to feel like I'm entirely there with you. That goes into the behaviors. That goes into tuning other things out, and I'm focused on you. So that's purely eye communication. That takes intentionality because most people don't realize what they're doing. They have no idea what they do with their eyes. It's just these things are habits. That's what we're dealing with. Codified habits. To anyone that's, I could argue by your teenage years, you become pretty codified in your habits. We deal with people from the 30 to 50 range, usually 30 to 60 range. And these are really codified habits. So you got to change your habits of your voice, your eyes, your smile, what you do with your hands, how you stand to show you're present, to show care, to show you're focused entirely on your audience, whether it's one-on-one as I'm looking at this camera to you, or if there's 100 people, what I do with my eyes and how I hold them and look at them versus look at the ground, look at the ceiling. It looks like I'm not really present. I'm distracted, etc.
So Ben, you mentioned the habits, and I actually had a car ride. I was going to help a friend pick up something over the weekend, and he was just back from vacation. He and his two kids and his wife, they went on a cruise, and he said they did not get the internet package, so they couldn't use their cell phones. They couldn't use any of the technology. And he said, Heath, it was alarming. He said it was really good. I'm glad we did that, but he said it was alarming the first couple of days of how much I caught myself trying to look at my phone or do something on my phone just out of natural habit. So if we know that those habits are there, how do we start to break that habit? How do we get more, be more intentional about being present to show that we do care and that we are trying to connect with someone? Any thoughts on how you overcome those habits that, in a lot of ways, Ben, I would say maybe are blind spots. Maybe we don't even realize that we're doing it at times.
I think that's accurate. And I think it just takes intentionality. I spoke with a leader yesterday, and I was asking her how she's doing working on the things we're working on. And she goes, well, I'm not really working on it. I'm fairly overwhelmed. I'm back to back to back to back. So when I have an all team with thousands of my team, I leave one meeting and go right into it. And I challenged her on it. I said, you got to change your schedule. You got to work with your admin to add buffer, to add margin so that you don't go straight from that to, you got to get your head right. So Heath, I would tie that into what you're describing as boundaries and setting up. I mean, I put up screen time for my three teenage boys. I don't want them always looking at their phone. So I limit them because it's become a habit. They just grab it and look at it because it's a habit. But if they are limited, they'll do it less. And so I'm just trying to veer that, just like you and I, we may want to, for example, on this podcast, I turned off my phone. I know you don't want buzzing. I know you don't want distractions, but I did that to be entirely present. That's an intentionality of what I'm doing. So I'm right here during this podcast. There's little things we can do, but that takes intentionality.
Well, Ben, something you said a minute ago, too, I want to go back to for a second. You said in communication, we have to remember it's about them. It's not about us. And so I'm going to put myself out there a little bit. I hope I'm not the only person that's ever went through this before. But sometimes, even with self-awareness, I go back to networking situations. And sometimes in those networking situations, maybe a little more nervous or a little more angst in those type of settings. And whenever you meet someone new, and all of a sudden, if those nerves are elevated, I've been guilty of all of a sudden start talking about everything that we do at Upstream, or whenever I was at a firm, it's, someone would say, "What do you do?" It was all about our services and a number of offices and, all the things about me. And I was not doing that intentionally, Ben, but then I realized when someone would walk away, I didn't even remember their name half the time. I was so in the moment of meeting someone. It was all about me because that's what I was comfortable talking about. And then I couldn't even remember their name. Chances are they probably walked away. They probably didn't remember my name. And I've had to learn how to shift that. So, Ben, I guess one, is that natural in networking settings if people are maybe a little more uncomfortable in those type of settings?
It's not just those settings, it's actually a lot of corporate environments. We end up talking about ourselves, our thing, our widget, our company, our organization, our industry. We talk about ourselves because it's what we know. There's a great story that I sometimes reference, a Dale Carnegie story. He wrote one of the great bestsellers of how to win over people with influence, which I think I just butchered the name, but you know the book I'm talking about. But he tells a story of when he's at one of his trainings and he went to the back and the woman didn't know who he was. And he basically just asked her questions like for 20 minutes. And he didn't say more than 5 words. He just asked questions. At the end, when he had to go, she said, "You are an amazing conversationalist. Thank you for this time." And he didn't say anything. And my point and bring up to you, Heath, is the idea of curiosity, the idea of asking questions, the idea of gamifying it, of sometimes in our programs, we'll play hot potato, make a challenge to find out as much as possible about the other person. And we could talk about like high school career. Tell me about your high school. Where did you go? Tell me more. Did you play sports? Like trying to find out about the other person versus talking about yourself. Because then you'll turn around, "Oh, really? Where did you go to high school? And what did you play?" And I'll answer, but then I got to turn around to show curiosity. So in the networking environments, stay curious, gamify it, challenge yourself to figure out ways to remember names. That is a great skill. Heath, how I remember the name Heath. So for me, I'm a big fan of Chip and Dan Heath, Heath brothers. So that helped me remember Heath. Like literally, when I first met you, that's what I did. Find ways to remember names, but that's gamifying it.
So Ben, when you say gamifying in that, being inquisitive and that constantly asking questions, yeah, I go back and I look at my kids. I have a 6-year-old and 11-year-old, and they are always asking questions. And then as we get older and we feel like we have to be an expert or know everything, where do we lose that in life, and what drives that? Because I feel like at a certain stage in a career, we start to lose that power of questions and start feeling like we have to have the answers. Is that something you see commonly with the people that you work with?
I suppose so. I don't know if or where or how we lose curiosity or interest in others, because there are many people that have a great amount of curiosity, great amount of empathy, and it's some of it's innate. The rest of it, you and I have to be intentional to increase or grow. There's no doubt about that. But I'll tie affect to curiosity because affect is a physical expression of psychological or emotional energy. And as kids, we let it out. "Dad, give me some food. I'm hungry." And kids are good at getting what they want. As we become teenagers, we lose affect, meaning we get, call it peer pressure, call it puberty, call it life is getting real, grades are getting real, becoming subject matter experts, and we get a little more held in. And so we share this in our coaching because as we get into that decision making, we get really tight. And a lot of the work we do at Decker is trying to loosen people up and get them to speak with passion and voice and lean into the audience. And that's really focused on affect to let go of the content because we focus so much on the content and ourselves and we forget about the experience. I think there's a little bit of tie in with curiosity, meaning we get so focused on us and what we do and we lose sight of them, of Heath, where he lives, what he does. Tell me more, because we get focused on what we do. I think there's a little bit of a tie in with how we grow up. In fact, now that I think about it, there's a TED clip, Sir Ken Robinson talk about, kids are born with creativity and curiosity. And as they age, we kind of kill it out of them. And that's what we got to look into changing with our education systems. It's a fantastic TED Club.
Yeah, Ben, I love that. And as you were talking, I think sometimes my own struggle is we live in a society of busy. The more you have going on, maybe you feel like you're more important, but sometimes in that busy environment, we miss the time to take the extra 5 minutes and ask those questions. How was your weekend? Tell me about your high school. Tell me, all those type of things. And I think sometimes we miss out on that, truly that opportunity to connect with people. And
Well, and Heath, especially in Zoom, like you think about the last few years, through any video interaction, we just go right into business. No, if you're in an office, there's something about clothing or smell or the way the room is set up that we talk about something. In a Zoom, we dive right into it. In a Teams meeting, in a Google Meet, whatever video platform you use, and we're working with a lot of clients. How do you fix that? Because we lose the connection piece of, I don't even know how Heath's day is. We just dove into the process and the system. So that's something you really got to be intentional about. That is an easy fix of, well, the first couple of minutes, just to, how is everyone's day? How are we doing? Like slow down and then dive into it. Sorry, I interrupted you, but that's an important piece tied into video.
no, you're fine, Ben. So in a way, kind of almost planning unplanned time when we have those interactions to make that connection,
Yeah, back to intentionality.
to have those kind of conversations. I like that. So Ben, one thing I'll go back to, we talked about those environments of networking or whatever it may be, whenever maybe the nerves are a little high. And I don't have scientific data to support this, but what I can say is in the public accounting profession, there are definitely more self-proclaimed introverts than extroverts, without a doubt. And I think sometimes when that word's used around business development or networking, it's used as a negative. So, do you see that being an introvert is truly a negative when it comes to communication and connection with people?
Well, no. My worry about the word introvert is, to many, not all, but to many, it can become a scapegoat and an excuse. I don't do well there because I'm an introvert, and we use it as a scapegoat. And so, in a lot of the work that we do, just to put it as plain and simple, what I'm trying to do with any executive is to pull out the backyard barbecue person. Now, that's a term I use, but it's like, if you think about, you have a drink in your hand, you're talking to your friends, are you an introvert there? And to most people, no. I speak freely. I'm excited. I smile. I tell stories. So why can't we have that person be in a conference room, in a boardroom? And so that's at the gist, at the bottom line of what I'm trying to do. We at Decker, that's it. Now, here's a real life example. Working with a leader yesterday who's runs multi-thousand people organization. She didn't do great in an all team meeting. She doesn't like it. She's just trying to get through it. But she likes board meetings. I said, explain that to me, because it's usually the opposite for most people. I don't like board meetings because they're going to attack me and they're looking to look for something wrong. She goes, because I know my business and they just want to talk the business, and I'm an introvert. So I really pushed her. I said, let's think about the introvert, the way you are backyard barbecue. Are you this way? She goes, yeah. I'm like, so let's just try to be that way for your all team, for all these moments that you show up, because that's a big aha to many people, whether you're an accountant, CEO, frontline, it doesn't matter. If you think about how you show up every time and make it consistent, because the big thing is take away an on off switch. When I'm at networking event, I got to turn it on. Now, to an introvert, that's very tiring and cumbersome and challenging. So, what if we didn't have to turn it on, but we just stayed curious and we asked questions? And who cares about us? But let's find out about them. That's gamifying. That's changing the mindset of, it's no longer about you. They ask you a question, like at a backyard barbecue, you're going to answer it, but you're also going to turn around to them. So I get worried that it gets used as a scapegoat and an excuse too much. I get that we have to find our energy in different places, but be careful of using it as that excuse.
So, Ben, let's say a scenario where maybe someone is more introverted and they meet someone that's maybe more extroverted. Do you have any guidance on like those different kind of personality traits and what people can do to effectively communicate with someone that may have a different personality than what they do?
Yeah, and there are so many assessment tools. DISC, genius from Lencioni Table Group. They have a great widget approach of trying to figure out your traits and what you're good at. And there's, half a dozen. It's good to know who they are. I mean, even within teams, to know what they like, how they operate, and adjusting accordingly. But shoot, I've worked with clients that do a total dissection of an audience, of a leader as they look to sell, and like literally break down everything. And it makes you adjust too much. But just knowing that if they're an introvert, they may not want to be super gregarious or big and talk. And so just you may want to lower it down a little bit based on them. Again, know your audience. And that's critical as you create messages. That's one thing that people don't do well enough is really dissect their audience, really know them well enough. We can always do more and just adjust to them. But in a network setting, you can overwhelm someone for sure of just being too big, too much. But you don't want to not be yourself. And that's a big thing where a lot of people think we're trying to create robots at Decker. No, just bring out your personal self, adjust it accordingly. So there's times you got to turn up and turn down different things.
And Ben, and those, so with what you just said there, and thinking about some of our conversation, say we have someone that maybe feels like they're an introvert, or I'll even probably take it a step further and say maybe they struggle with self-doubt, or what we call the imposter syndrome of, my gosh, if I'm talking to someone that has 25 more years of experience than I do, how can I bring value? So they won't speak up, or they'll hold in their thoughts. Or maybe Ben, another scenario similar but different, you mentioned in a meeting with a team, and maybe they're only a couple years into their career, and everyone else in the room is 20, 25 years in. And so they feel like, gosh, what value can I bring to this? So they will not communicate, or they'll just hold it in. What advice do you have for someone that maybe feeling that self-doubt, and so they're holding back on some of their thoughts or some of the value that they could bring in that team setting or to others that they meet?
The interesting thing is self-doubt and imposter syndrome happens to almost everybody. And you don't realize that, you just assume it's just you. I'm working with a leader right now, working on a commencement speech, and she's going to address self-doubt, imposter syndrome. And she's a woman that runs a huge organization that's fairly well known, just to make it more real. Part of the challenge is that we can forget the value we bring. I'll tie it into a quick story. I'm almost 50 years old. When I did my first one-on-one coaching in what I do was about 20 years ago. So with a gentleman from, I can say Cisco Systems, ran a huge part of the business. And the person was in their 50s. I was very intimidated. I had a lot of self-doubt. They had every degree, like literally Princeton, Columbia, Harvard, and one other Ivy League. No joke, whether it be a JD, their law degree, MBA, etc., master's. I was very intimidated. I had a lot of self-doubt. Who am I to work with this person? Bottom line, they weren't a great communicator. And I brought value to that person. And the person's boss's boss said, "You transformed this person." Oh my gosh. Now that reminded me of the value I or we can bring just by helping them become more aware of what they're doing and ways to fix it. We can forget a certain value that we bring. So whether it be other people reminding you, whether it be finding your lane, whether it be realizing the gaps, and that goes back to listener focused. When you stay listener focused and you realize, oh, they don't have this, oh, they need this, they don't realize that they don't have, like, whatever it is, that gives you confidence. That helps address the doubt. And then it goes into how you communicate it. My favorite tip in communications is audience only gets what you give them. And I'll say it again. Audience only gets what you give them. So Heath, tie that in a couple ways. What if I got 1 hour sleep last night? What if I don't want to be here on this podcast with you? Do you know? Do you need to know? Do your listeners need to know? No. And none of that's true, but I can disguise it with my energy, with how I talk. Same thing when I finish, I might think, shoot, that was terrible. I should have said this. I needed to do that. Well, do they know? Do any of your listeners, do you know? No, you don't. So audience only gets what you give them helps address that doubt, helps address like, I lost my place. I don't know what I'm talking about. You don't need to show it. And so I'm not just talking about discovering, but it helps that doubt of making sure every communication experience is pretty good.
Yeah, Ben, I love that. I wrote that down. I may have to use that if you don't mind at some point, because I think of like in the term sales in public accounting sometimes has a very negative connotation to it. But the way I kind of phrase it is if you know you bring value to your clients and you're making a difference in your client base, it's your role as an advisor. There are other people out there that can benefit from that. And they don't know that if you can't talk to them about it. So I love that thought process of maybe sometimes we underestimate our own value and the difference we can make with clients. Ben, something else that I see a lot of in our profession is, we'll say, the profession of nice. We have I'm so lucky we have so many great professionals. They truly care. They're truly passionate about what they do, but sometimes struggle to have the hard conversations. Maybe we're afraid we're going to hurt someone's feelings that's on our team, or maybe a client that we work with. So sometimes we'll avoid the hard conversations. And so in those settings, Ben, sometimes emotions can be high. Something you shared when I had the opportunity to hear you speak was about the nonverbal communication. Can you talk a little bit about, in those situations, how our nonverbal, I guess, let me ask it this way, Ben, what percentage of communication happens nonverbally? Because that stat was pretty impressive to me.
Well, here we're coming into a political season. We're going to watch debates, I think. Let's see if there's debates. But anyways, we're coming into a political season. Oftentimes what happens is my friends or people I know will ask me, "Hey, Ben, what did you think of that?" And I turn around to them and say, "Well, what did you think?" And what I'm sharing with you, Heath, is I see the same things you see. The only difference is I'm thinking, how can I fix it? So when you bring up nonverbals, you and I see the same thing, whether it be someone's too serious and they're talking about something positive, whether it be they're giving an inconsistent message. So what you're bringing up is what we talk about with the 3 V's: verbal, vocal, visual. It's really everything happening in a communication experience. Here we are on a video call, so you can see me. So there's visual included. So I would say a video call and in person tie into all 3 of those. They're all happening. Now on a phone, there's no visual. So I won't tie that in now. But we ask people, what do you think counts most in communications? And everyone thinks differently on it. Some people think the words, the verbal, like if there's closed captioning what I'm saying, that's the most important. Some people think the voice, vocal, the sound of my voice, and then something visual, what they see of someone. And then what we do is we do an exercise to show them the power of visual. And they realize that we do follow visual, the power of the visual. And the numbers are specifically verbal is 7%, vocal, I think, is 37, 38%, and then visual is 55%. Change the math. I'm not a great math. I study psychology. I think your listeners are
And
more.
our audience are accountants. They may correct everything you just said.
They sure did. And so I apologize to your audience, but they can do the numbers correctly. But you get the gist of it. Now, those numbers aren't from us. They're 30 years old, from Albert Moravian, a professor at UCLA. And he wrote a book called Silent Messages. And it's really based on an inconsistent message, meaning when I am inconsistent, what will you believe? And the studies show that if I'm inconsistent, you'll believe what you see most when it comes to trust and believability. Meaning, if I'm saying, I'm excited to be here, I can't wait to talk to you and have this session, but I say it with a serious face and I say it with a monotone and I look away, I can't wait to be here, I'm really excited. The question is, what will you believe? You'll believe what you see. Secondly, what you hear. Lastly, the words that I say. And my point tied into an inconsistent message and this challenge of showing you care or showing your heart. Most communications is inconsistent. And the work we do, we're just honestly, in addition to the backyard barbecue, all we're trying to do is make you consistent. If you're consistent, we have no role, we have no job. Chapter 2 of our book, I think we called it Business Communication Sucks, because it's inconsistent. We say one thing, but sound and look a different way. And so we're just trying to be more consistent. So that ties into harsh feedback. If you want to show you care, there's a great book by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. I recommend everyone read it. And many of my clients commit to it. But it's the idea, and they share a good story that I think gets to the gist of it. It's a Sheryl Sandberg story when she was at Facebook. She might have been at Google, forget. But basically, she had a team member that ummed and too much and used too many fillers. And she said, She gave them feedback. Heads up, you use too many fillers and it affects how you come across. All right, I get it. Okay. And Cheryl had to come over the top, say, no, you don't get it. You don't sound smart. It takes away your credibility. I'm worried about, like, there's a sense of care that came. Now that's radical candor. The employee felt the care, felt wanting them to be better. Like, this is for you, not for me. That's radical candor. So that ties into showing how you feel. That's a consistent message.
Ben, it's funny you mentioned that. I pointed to it right here behind me. I actually have that book on my stand here. It is a great book. So, Ben, something you said there that I think is critically important. You talked about the person receiving the feedback. If someone knows or they go into a situation where they are getting the kind of feedback that maybe they didn't want to hear, what guidance would you have for them just to maybe help create a win-win scenario? Because sometimes, let me just share it this way, Ben. In my early on, when my coach was giving me that kind of feedback, I immediately went up to a wall and would start to try to justify the things that I did. And it was absolutely not receiving the feedback. And it actually probably killed the conversation instead of encouraging that kind of conversation. So, what guidance would you have to those that are receiving that kind of feedback to help them be more successful?
Don't forget the why. I think what we do as communicators or as those giving the harsh feedback, we forget to give them the why. And the why is really showing the care. Otherwise, we'll get tactical. Heath, you're doing this wrong. You can't be doing this. You got to fix that. Now, there's no why in that. Heath, if you fix this, we're going to be able to get you to that VP level because at that point, you're going to have a lot more people. And here's what it's going to look like when you get there. But this is what's holding you back. And this is what I'd love to help you get through to get you at that VP level in the next 12 months. There's the why. That makes you care more. That gets me showing you I'm trying to groom you and I care about you, Heath, versus just fix us. And that's where you bring up nice, and a lot of people are afraid to bring up those harsh conversations, those harsh things of what to fix. And so say whatever company and add the word nice after it. That's a common term. Decker nice. We at Decker, we're nice to people. And so we don't give that. So name a company and then add nice to it. And that's pretty consistent because people don't want to give that feedback. But if you add the why, it changes everything.
Yeah, you have to, Ben. I think it's nearly impossible for anyone to get better if we're not having those kind of conversations with each other and then receiving that kind of feedback. So, Ben, as we are close to wrapping up our time here, one thing we like to ask every guest, maybe a resource, whether that's a book or a podcast or whatever it may be, that's really just made a significant impact on your own journey. Do you have any recommendations for our listeners?
I have a couple. I mean, with the podcast that you can sign up for, everyone is different. A lot of people take walks and drive a car and listen to podcasts. I'm not at that point yet, but I have many peers and clients that do that, which I think is awesome. I tie up to Twitter and X like feeds, little morsels of wisdom that I find inspiration in. So if you can find that, do that. Sign up for that. Find ways that it fills you up, that it comes to you, because a lot of times we don't go to it. But from a super biased perspective, Bert, which he's my father, I call him Bert. We've been in business for 20 years. Bert Decker wrote a book, You've Got to Be Believed to Be Heard. I think it's a classic as far as so much of what you and I have talked about. He says how to communicate, how important is it? And it's basically think about your accountants and CPA firms and advisors that you've got to be believed to be heard. Think about what they say to clients, what it means for their finances to tweak. You've got to be believed to be heard. So that means they got to think about their communications to be heard. Everything we're talking about matters to them. But an additional one is I'm a huge fan, I mentioned this earlier, of Chip and Dan Heath. They wrote a great bestseller, which is one of the best messaging books, I think, of Made to Stick. It's even memorable in how it looks. It's orange with duct tape across. We partnered years ago with them and created a Decker Made to Stick messaging program because they liked our grid and we loved their success principles. But they've written books on with Switch, Upstream, thinking about business, change management, how to fix problems. I think they have a great way to get people to think. But Malcolm Gladwell books, those are things that are my go-to.
Very good, Ben. Well, as we wrap up here with our time, if someone wanted to reach you, what would be the best way to do that?
Well, I don't know, our website, Decker.com. I'm not afraid of people reaching out to me. I'll give them, I think my email's somewhere on our website, ben@decker.com. It's not that crazy hard to figure out, but I think people can get better in communications and finding a way to keep it as an intentional way. Because Bert used to put this at the bottom of his email. The effectiveness of your communications determines the effectiveness of your life. And you started out talking about that. And I think that's really validating. You brought up Little League and kids. It's true. It goes into board meetings. It goes into spouses. It goes into so many things that we operate on a daily basis. And it's not just presentation skills or soft skills. These are mandatory that we have to apply to our world and everything we do. So yeah, I think just our website and then explore and figure out what you need, but read the book, just stay in the process of getting better. That's what it's about.
Very good, Ben. Well, I love that you said the process of getting better, because I don't think any of us can probably ever be perfect at communicating. So it is a process, and we continue to learn and continue to improve. So Ben, I greatly appreciate the time you've invested today. I continue to learn every time I talk to you, so I'm grateful for that. Ben, I look forward to our next conversation at some point. Thank you to our listeners, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the Upstream Leader podcast. We hope today's episode has enriched your understanding of what it takes to become a high-performing leader in the accounting profession. If you'd like to hear more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and visit our website where you'll find full show notes and more. theupstreamleader.com.
professionalproductions.net